What's the good word, Jets fans? It's your boy DKB here. We're diving back into our coaching breakdown series, and today we're diving into Bobby Slowik. He's our fourth head coach that we're covering so far. He also happens to have the fourth highest odds of potentially being the New York Jets head coach. We'll dive into the next quartet after this, but Bobby Slowik is probably the most underrated of this group just because he happens to be fairly young for the position, and also he's had a tremendous amount of success that's followed him, and I think a lot of this is due to his coaching history in terms of who he's had the privilege of being, whose tutelage he's been under, and the fact that he's really been able to kind of piece it together and get the most out of a lot of his weapons and, of course, a lot of his quarterbacks as well. And coming off his recent Texans success, even though they're in a bit of a down year, which I find to be fairly funny, at least through the eyes of a Jets fan, because leading your division, having a 6-3 record would be a tremendous success. All of us would be celebrating that, even if there were some hardships going on through the offense. But we'll get into all of the the X's and O's of the field work and kind of what's happening with them. But it starts off with a couple of things. As with every coach that we've covered so far, he is a former player, was a wide receiver at Michigan Tech. He also happens to be fairly young, where at being 37 years old, he has the luxury of, if he can find a way to have that long-term success, he could stick around for 20 years, really, if he wanted to, right? One of those rare situations of a coach that can go out of their own accord, right, on their own merit, depending on whenever they decide they want to call it quits. Now, when you get into his coaching tree, right, the background of how he's been able to rise to NFL stardom, it starts off with him and his time with the Redskins when they were still the Redskins, as a video assistant, breaking down tape and helping game plan for opponents. And then he was able to get himself promoted into a defensive assistant coach, which I find particularly interesting because you've had this mix of coaches just throughout the NFL where they've started off on one side of the ball, but they've really made their name on the other side. And in this case, I think having that, I don't know if I even want to call it basic, right? Because, he overlaps during his tenure with guys like DeMeco Ryans, for example. But having that solid foundation of what, a defense looks to do, right? How you want to, in certain cases, attack an offense, and in certain cases, just making sure that from a coverage standpoint, from a functional standpoint, how can you put the best defense on the field or allow some of these guys to really go out there and just ball out. Now, once he went from being a defensive assistant coach, one thing that you have to keep in mind here is that the staff that he had around him was elite. He had guys like Mike Shanahan, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniel, and he had his dad, Bob Slowik, who was the cornerbacks coach, on that staff as well during that tenure. So he was able to watch all of these guys in the zone, in their element, and really piece and pick up what parts, if you want to think about having like a create a transformer, right, or a build a coach, he got the mindset of a guy like Shanahan. He got the defensive elements from a guy like DeMeco. He got the wide receiver principles from a guy like Matt LaFleur, or Sean McVay, I should say, and just the understanding of how to game plan from a guy like Matt LaFleur. Mike McDaniels and his ability to create and craft strong run games. So this is a guy that I really, really love in terms of all of the greatest minds that have been able to have success in this last 2-3 decades. He's been able to learn and get groomed directly by them. So again, this is a name I feel like is extremely underrated, and it's not just him riding on the coattails of guys. He's had an immense amount of success on his own. So he goes from the Redskins, he actually takes a small stint here, right? He ended up spending 3 years grading players for PFF before joining the 49ers. And that's also another aspect I like because it speaks to his ability to go out there and find certain players that he likes, right? And generally you have a pretty strong division, right? Coaches know what kind of players they want. It's up to the general managers to evaluate and scout that talent. I feel like you kind of get both worlds with a guy like Bobby Slowik, where he can walk into Joe Douglas or wherever the future GM's office is, and he can say, here's how I'm viewing some of these players that you have on your board and who I see as being an ideal fit or guys that I can cater to the scheme, etc., etc. And again, it's just another thing to fall in love with. When he actually makes it to the 49ers, he gets over there as well as defensive quality control coach. Then he flips other sides of the ball under Shanahan, and he starts as an offensive assistant coach, offensive passing game specialist, then gets promoted to offensive pass game coordinator. His success there helped him land his current job as Texans offensive coordinator, and all he did was go out there and turn he turned C.J. Stroud into probably one of the greatest young quarterbacks that you can find in NFL history. I mean, he already has labels like the greatest rookie quarterback of all time and the most accurate quarterback in the NFL. And when you take a look at some of his ability to elude pressure and make things happen from a creativity standpoint, there's just a lot to fall in love with this game. And one of the things that I like about this is that these weren't elements of what you've seen him do during his time in college. This is stuff that you can tell he's obviously built, evolved, and put into his game under the tutelage of, Bobby Slowik as the offensive coordinator. So we'll talk about all of that in a minute, right? When you take a look at just overall the weapons he's had that he's been able to make a name for or help elevate to one of their best career years, and the quarterbacks he's been able to influence as well, C.J. Stroud, Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy, and then when you get into the weapons, you have Devin Singletary, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Debo, Kyle Juszczyk, and then Christian McCaffrey is all guys that have really been able to thrive under the watchful eye of Bobby Slowik. And you can't always give 100% credit to really anybody, right? Head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, etc. But it really feels like the roles and the titles that he's held at that time really correlate to the success or some of the best seasons that these players have had, with him having direct impact over it, right? So take it with a grain of salt, but just some names, and there's still plenty more missing that he's been able to help out with. Now, from a scheme standpoint, I won't dive into this one as much as I really have with the others, because while he is still his own individual and his playbook is definitely vastly different from a guy like Kyle Shanahan, the principles, right, the principles of a West Coast offense are definitely heavily factored in with this scheme. But it's a flexible playbook, excuse me. Definitely strong on zone blocking run schemes, but he's been a little bit more transcendent in including elements like gap scheme blocking to account for things like injury and personnel that have pretty much impacted him throughout the course of his career, as you would expect with most coaches. But I think when you look at the offensive line injuries he's had and then injuries to some of his star players, you can definitely see that he's had a shift in philosophy a bit there just to make sure that he can manage, right? And then him being run-oriented on first downs is something to make note of. For us specifically, that could be some cause for concern, right? I think heading into the Jets game, for like the last couple weeks or so, he's ran on, I think it was like 10 of 16 first downs I saw. And from the Texans fan standpoint and what I've been able to dive into, obviously, one, they hate it because there hasn't been a tremendous amount of success. Joe Mixon really balled out in week one, but then he had injuries that quickly piled up, lingered, sapped him. Then he's been out, and they just haven't really been able to find a successful recipe for getting the ground game going. So from the fan standpoint, right, and we know this better than anything, it just feels like a guy is running for the sake of saying that they want to run the ball, and the effectiveness doesn't really match the volume of what you're seeing there. You could also say that a lot of that is built into how he scripts and game plans, and I saw a lot of fans really upset about him not being able to respond appropriately to adjustments that the defense makes. And, I take all of that and note it as something that could be frustrating here. But again, it's hard to really, as a Jets fan, even when I dive in and I sit here and I look at all the, data, and I look at all these stats and I just look at the guy and what he's actually done and accomplished, it's hard for me to really nitpick and scold a lot of these OCs unless there's glaring deficiencies, because we have had piss poor bottom tier coordinating really from the offensive side for years and years and years. And we might have had, shades of having a strong season, like when Ryan Fitzmagic helped us out, but that was on the back of Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. But outside of that, there really hasn't been a ton to really get excited about, right? So I love to get back to those days, and I think all of these candidates that we talked about can definitely help. But Bobby Slowik's caught my eye. Let me know where you guys kind of rank him at as you're hearing this. After reviewing everything, I think I would still have Ben Johnson at the top. And then I'm grappling with if I would put Slowik over Vrabel. I think I would still give Vrabel the nod just because I think he could put together a solid coaching staff. And then I love the way that his leadership would shine through. But, you can put Ben Johnson there at 2A. You could put Mike Vrabel at 2B. Maybe you could put Ben Johnson. Vice versa. Either one's fine with me. And then I still have... who's the guy I just covered before this? We had Ben, Vrabel. I'm covering Slowik now. I can't remember who I had before this. Yeah, either way, Slowik is somewhere between my second and third favorite guy right now, right? So let's dive back into a little bit more of the background stuff, right? We talked about him being credited with the development of CJ Stroud. It's already being deemed the greatest rookie season of all time. And there's not a ton really to argue about that, but I don't want to get into the semantics of all that. When you take a look at some of the high level numbers to be aware of or stats to know, when you take a look at what he did in year one with a rookie, he had that offense be second in NFL in pass plays over 25 yards. So when you talk about those explosive plays, he's been able to find a way to get those done often. They had 41 last year, which helped them become second. He had the fewest giveaways in the NFL with 14. He led the league in yards per game with 273.9. And he led the league in touchdown to interception ratio at 4.6. So basically 5 touchdowns to every interception. And only Joe Montana and Tom Brady have also led the league in, a similar category that did better or above, I believe, somewhere along those lines. But he's in great territory, right? And even in his second year, a lot of people are saying that Stroud has taken a step back. And I wouldn't really argue that. For a lot of the main pain points with that offense, you look at, I think it's their left guard, Kenyon Green, and you've seen Quinnen Williams among the rest of our interior kind of have a field day against them, much as the rest of the league had. But literally, he is the biggest common denominator between a lot of these stale, broken, busted, and then just negative plays that offensive line has experienced. And then, of course, as a whole, they've been suffering via pass protection. And I think a lot of that you can also contribute to Kenyon Green as well, because teams are able to put these stunts together. They're able to put these game plans to really single out Kenyon Green. And while you can't put him on an island, you can make his job in a phone booth extremely difficult. And the fact that the rest of the offensive line will feel like they have to overextend and pick up the slack that help them out just puts them out of position and in a terrible situation in their own right. So that is something to keep in mind as well, right? But a chance to Bobby Slowik is interesting to me because it takes me back to when we hired Robert Saleh and he chose his OC, he picked LaFleur over Mike McDaniels. In hindsight being 2020, all of us would have much rather have seen McDaniels here. But for LaFleur's credit, don't forget, with any other quarterback not named Zach Wilson, we were putting up record-setting numbers. I mean, we were top 5 with any quarterback not named Wilson, but if we had them in for a full season, it felt like we could have dropped plenty of records over the New York Jets history that we haven't seen accomplished before. So this feels like maybe the decision, present day, to go in and correct that and get a highly qualified OC to be put in place as the main guy, right? And then you get a understudy under a guy like Bobby Slowik that you can feel really good about, and having 2 elite minds on the offensive side of the ball or above average puts us in a situation that we haven't had in decades. So I would be all for that. One of the things that I like most about what he's been able to accomplish, specifically with the Texans, is that he's still been able to create a formidable offense in the face of significant injury. Being down Stephon Diggs, being down Nico Collins, being down Tank Dell, being down Joe Mixon, and then, of course, the Kenyon Green conversation, as we've talked about. This is a guy that, yeah, they might not be top 3, top 5 in every single category or anything, but considering that Stroud has been sacked 30 or more times already in just 9 games, considering he's been hit even more than that, and the amount of pressures he's been receiving, and they've still been able to create explosive plays. They've still been able to have multiple drives that, are 6, 7 plus plays. They've still been able to hit the big ones, right? And, 1, 2, 3 play drives where they've just been able to have a huge play or hit a home run. And then, of course, they still had those standout games with Joe Mixon where he absolutely balled out. You can look at his game versus the Jets. You can look at week 1. And I think even the week before the Jets game, Joe Mixon was in and having himself a good day as well. So seems like he started to find a formula to turn around the ground game as well. Now, as we mentioned, concerns about counters to defensive adjustments will be a huge question mark. And from a Jets perspective, one of the things we don't want to hear about any candidate that we're going to hire, because we've seen this for a long time where it feels like a guy doesn't just have a 15 script play that's already set in stone. It feels like he has the entire game scripted, and he does not want to switch from that. And it's very frustrating to watch a guy continue to just run the ball on first down and we pick up a yard or we lose yardage, and then on second down we go right back to a different version of essentially the same exact play. And it's not like we built on it or we're doing a different variation. It's almost literally the exact same thing. So that's not necessarily the case with Bobby in and of itself. But he does have a strong commitment to a run-oriented offense. So something that I appreciate a little bit more as being kind of an old school guy, but I do want to see the effectiveness behind it, right? I think there's an element of, I think I heard this on like an old Madden game, matter of fact, but it could have just been somebody I was talking to when I used to play online. Having a balanced offense doesn't mean that you have run the ball 50% of the time and you pass the ball 50% of the time. A balanced offense means that you can utilize the most potent aspect of what you do well to lift up the areas that you may not be so strong in. And so, for example, you look at the receiving room for the Jets, for example, you would assume we'd be able to pass extremely well to open up the run, which we still have an elite running back in Breece Hall back there, and I love Braylon Allen, but still, the sentiment speaks for itself, right? And vice versa. If you had a strong run game, you should be able to force a defense to stack the box in order to give you better matchups on the outside that you can take advantage of and different things of that nature. So I see Bobby Slowik doing that, which is why I'm not as concerned. But we'll see how things play out if we find a way to actually end up having him come here, right? Offensive line play can be a major concern as well. Kenyon Green is definitely the black sheep on that offensive line, but as a whole, it's not like anybody is necessarily blowing the league away. Laramie Tunsil is who he is. I know they have Titus Howard at right tackle for them as well. And then they have Juice Scruggs at center, who's also moonlighted at guard for them. So they have some pieces that are really liked. It just hasn't seemed like they've been able to really gel and put things together. And at least from what I saw, a lot of people blame the offensive line coach specifically for that, more so than anything with Bobby Slowik. But still, as him being the architect of the offense as a whole, you would expect him to step in when necessary to figure out how to get around that. And that's what made year one with CJ Stroud so impressive, where it seems like he's taken a step back in year two, because in year one, he allowed CJ Stroud to be able to get outside of the pocket, bootlegs, play action, shifted line protection schemes, which is another thing that may go against Bobby Slowik when it comes to whoever ends up being his quarterback of the future. CJ Stroud is aware of the protection calls and knows how to make them and stuff, to my understanding, but they left that to the young center in Juice Scruggs, who has 2 years under his belt just like CJ Stroud, but he missed 6 games, I think, in his rookie year. So doesn't have the same ample amount of experience. You would probably like to see the quarterback have that responsibility. But, we've seen it all, right? Obviously, we've had a tremendous tradition of having elite centers here for the most part. So we've seen the offensive line be able to just do what they do and figure it out. But in this day and age, you want kind of that quarterback, general, as I've heard some of the greats speak to. So other than that, he's impressed during his last head coaching cycle. Panthers, Falcons, Seahawks pretty much made the entire run that I think you saw guys like Ben Johnson get. And I think the only reason he returned to the Texans, at least from a lot of the rumors and stuff I saw, was he was using the interviews to help bump up his next offer to get retained by the Texans. But other than that, the feedback that I've heard has largely been that he impressed during a lot of these interviews. And, guys just aren't settling for a new job anymore. So maybe it was another situation of he wanted it to be the right time, right place, right fit, and I won't knock him for that. But this is a off season that not only will be extremely pivotal for us, but two, there's so much talent for the offensive side specifically that should be available. The Jets need to come out of this with really any one of these top, 3 guys here in Slowik, in Ben Johnson, in a Mike Vrabel, if you will. Why can't I remember the third guy that I covered? It's going to eat at me because when I'm editing into this, I'm going to see it. But, overall, Bobby Slowik is a guy that I really, really like. Really feel like he's underrated, and I'm not prepared to call him an offensive genius, but I don't think he's, too many tiers, if tiers is even the right word to use, below a guy like Ben Johnson, who's also taking the league by storm. So let me know what you guys think. What does the fit look like? How confident would you be in Slowik leading the Jets? And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.